in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Mediation. My name is Michelle and I'm the Communications Manager at the TCM Group. I'd now like to hand over to mediation expert David Liddell, who will be leading today's webinar.
Michelle, thank you very much and welcome everybody to the webinar today, one of our most popular webinars, an introduction to mediation. Of course, mediation is growing rapidly as a credible alternative to the traditional dispute resolution systems within organisations. And today's webinar will provide a useful overview of mediation, how it works, why it works, also some of the benefits and limitations of this emerging approach. We'll consider the nature of conflict and the role and the impact that conflict has within organisations and the benefits that mediation brings in helping bring people together at times of conflict and change. I'll share with you some thinking around the mediation process and start to unpack what actually happens in a mediation. I think one of the biggest strengths of mediation is it happens behind closed doors, allowing the parties in a conflict to have a dialogue. One of the biggest weaknesses of mediation also is that it happens behind closed doors. And in doing so, it can be shrouded in mystery, and there can be a lot of myths that might abound in relation to mediation. I'd also like to share with you some tips and hints in relation to how you might be able to handle conflicts and disputes and prevent them from escalating and resolve them when they do. So I'd like to say a very warm welcome. My name is David Liddell. I'm the CEO of the TCM Group. A little bit of information about the TCM Group. We've been in business now for 12 years. I've been involved in the area of mediation and dispute resolution for 20 years. My background originally was in community and race relations in Leicester up in the East Midlands, and I was involved in tenant engagement initiatives in the early 90s in Leicester. And I saw firsthand within those communities I was working in the impact of violence and conflict within communities, and actually how little was done to resolve and address those issues in a proactive or constructive manner. I then set up one of the first non-violence and mediation programs here in the UK up in Leicester, and for 8 years ran a large mediation and non-violence program within Leicester. In the late 90s, I went on to do an MBA and set up the TCM Group, and TCM stands for Total Conflict Management, which is a direct steal from Total Quality Management, which I'll talk a little bit more in more detail in terms of our ethos and values as a business. So in the last 12 years that we've been running, we've embedded mediation into over 300 organisations here in the UK and overseas, and they're as diverse as BT, Lloyds Banking Group, EDF Energy, the UN, amongst many, many others where we've developed mediation schemes. And we also provide mediation services for organisations, as well as delivering training for mediators and managers and HR professionals in how securing better outcomes at times of conflict and change. We secure a successful outcome in over 90% of cases that are referred through to us, and we have a team of full-time mediators and trainers supported with a team of world-class leading mediation consultants. We design and deliver a training program, various training programs, but the flagship program for workplace mediators is the National Certificate in Workplace Mediation, and we offer excellent customer service, and we're really proud to be going through the accreditation with Customer First at the moment, which is celebrating our commitment to customer service. So that just sets a little bit of a scene in terms of who we are and what we're about, but I hope that provides a useful overview. So the focus for today, as I've mentioned, we'll look at conflict, how it works, why it happens. When I go in and talk to boards and employees and unions and others, I often describe myself not as a mediator, but as a PR agent for conflict. I think we've got conflict all wrong, and conflict's got something of a bad name for itself. Conflict is seen as the necessary evil of many organisations. Therefore, our policy frameworks and our organisational systems are designed to manage or to mitigate the risk of conflict. My view, however, is that conflict itself is a necessary and healthy element of organisations. In fact, if we listen to psychologists, Bruce Tuckman amongst many others, they tell us that the storming stage is a key stage in team development, and that the most effective and high-performing teams in our organisations are teams that experience discord and disagreement. So it's not the conflict itself that's the problem. It's how we react and how we manage as HR professionals, as leaders and as organisations at times of conflict. And my experience tells me that organisations are reacting badly at times of conflict
And in actual fact, the systems and processes that we have designed in our organisations to resolve conflicts are paradoxically making making conflicts much, much worse. I'll introduce you to mediation and provide an overview of the process, how it works, what it can and what it can't do, as I've mentioned. We'll look at the mediation model that we've developed at TCM called the Fair Mediation Model, and I'll also provide you with a series of tips, 5 tips for managing disputes and conflicts. There is a chance for questions throughout. You should have in front of you a dashboard from the Citrix online GoToWebinar system. If you do have a question, if there's anything I say that you don't agree with or that you do agree with, or if you just want to say hello, please do pop a question onto the system. And I will pause for breath at key points and take up any questions, and I'm happy to respond to those. And please do feel free to challenge things I've said. My hope is from this webinar that you actually have something useful that you can take back to your organisation to help you transform the way you handle disputes and make better use of mediation within your organisation. So we'll start off by just doing a scoping exercise and trying to look at the nature of conflict and disputes within organisations. In a moment I'll share with you a definition of conflict and talk through how and why conflicts occur. But to begin with, I'd just like to think a little bit about how organisations currently handle disputes and the problem with our existing dispute resolution procedures. These procedures go by many names, but I'm particularly referring to grievance procedures, bullying, harassment, dignity at work, or fair treatment procedures. The procedures that I've just described are generally reactive. They react to a problem when it occurs. The grievance processes in particular and others are drawn from a quasi-judicial adversarial model of justice, which requires one party to present their case in order for the organisation to take a view and identify a winner and a loser. And in doing so, they are inherently adversarial, drawing on an inherently adversarial justice model. The nature, therefore, of the grievance and other procedures is that they polarise the parties quite early on. It encourages entrenchment from the parties. Parties are required to write things down, to collect evidence, and in doing so, it strengthens the view of the party's position is that I'm right, you're wrong. The other person should have some sanction applied against them. The policies that exist within organisations rarely identify the root cause of conflict. In fact, I would suggest that I haven't seen a policy in place that actually does identify the root cause of conflict. The reason being is that policies and procedures exist to change behaviour or to tackle the behaviours that might arise within the organisation. I will suggest that the root cause of a conflict are our needs not being met or fulfilled. And policies and procedures don't address individual needs, they mitigate the risk of inappropriate behaviour. And in doing so, the needs of the individuals and the needs of the business are ignored and overlooked. One of the key elements or key failings of our existing dispute resolution systems, grievance processes again in particular, is that arising from a conflict or a dispute, there are numerous opportunities for learning, for development, and for growth for the individuals, for relationships, for teams, and for the business as a whole. Because of the nature of blame and the inherently adversarial nature of those procedures, the opportunities for learning are lost because we're so busy trying to defend ourselves against a potential attack. So we don't learn from the procedures, we kind of go through the procedures, and that's a real waste and a real loss. And in doing so, they impede creativity. Unless we think about the emails that people might send each other and the way that they're codified as being creative, I would suggest that they're actually destructive. The opportunity to come together and have a dialogue and find creative and innovative solutions to our problems are lost because our grievance processes and dispute resolution processes do not encourage that. In fact, one organisation I was working with recently, a small engineering organisation employing about 250 employees, had a grievance raised by a manager, and another manager raised a counter grievance against the other manager. So there were 2 grievances, and the HR director advised both of those managers, good managers, hard-working, committed, loyal managers, that they would investigate the grievances and come back with some findings and try and resolve it that way. They expected the investigation to last for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe slightly longer, and it was advised to those 2 managers at the point of the investigation commencing, that if the two managers spoke to each other during the investigation process, that they would be subject to disciplinary action. And my first reaction when I heard this is I thought the world has gone mad. Those two managers should have been put in a room together and given an opportunity to have a dialogue and a conversation with each other. But in actual fact, what the organisation was doing was saying to those very same managers is don't talk to each other at the very same time, that we should be looking for creating dialogue, collaboration, some level of understanding and opportunity to hear one another. And what the organisation did, whilst it was still following due process, is it actually worsened the situation substantially by putting a barrier to the two parties talking to each other. And in doing so, what that creates within organisations is a grievance culture within organisations. Now, of course, most organisations, it might only be 1 or 2 grievances a year, but in others, we start to see a substantial increase in grievances, dissatisfaction, absence, low engagement scores, so on and so forth. Many of those arising from our grievance processes. So how and why does conflict occur? Well, on the left-hand side there, we've got a bubble talking about destructive behaviours. And for many organisations, the first time that they know about a conflict or a dispute is where the behaviours become visible to a manager or to an HR professional. And of course, the organisation is able to, through process, address that behaviour. There may be a sanction applied, an investigation, or some form of development put in place to address that particular behaviour. In mediation, what we recognise, however, at the root cause of the conflict are needs that haven't been met or fulfilled. So if we imagine that we have a manager and an employee in a team meeting, the manager is chairing the meeting, the employee has been asked to produce a report. During the report, the feedback that the employee is given about their report, the manager makes a sarcastic comment, just off the cuff, small comment, potentially perceived as trivial even. The rest of the team laugh, and the employee kind of tries to carry on, feeling a little bit embarrassed and a little bit unsure. We maybe see that happen in many team meetings. The individuals need to be respected, to be valued, to be taken seriously, to be treated with dignity in that team meeting hasn't been met. That individual and the manager are now technically in conflict. Now, the manager doesn't know that. The employee doesn't know it. But what the employee experiences as a result of their needs not being met is a profound sense of loss, a loss of esteem, a loss of confidence, a loss of control, a loss of hope, a loss of some sense of a future. Well, what's the point in me giving presentations if I'm just going to be kind of laughed at and given sarcastic comments? And then we experience that fight or flight response as it is driven by these factors. The amygdala, the small part, the almond-shaped part of our brain starts to fire away, releasing strong hormones into our body, the adrenaline, the cortisol. That starts to give us those feelings of being in fight or flight, blood rushing to our muscles. And of course, those hormones play a really important part in conflict if we're going to have a fight or if we need to flee. And of course, in most organisations, the opportunity for fighting is fairly limited, and the opportunity for fleeing is fairly limited. So what happens is those hormones build up and build up within us, causing stress and trauma and anxiety for individuals, often coming through as stress, irritable bowel syndrome, bad backs, a whole array of different factors. And those emotional and psychological responses impact then on how we act, how we interact, and how we react. And it's those actions, interactions, and reactions which, as a result of the conflict, become divisive, hostile, and negative, which drives the negative behaviours. And as the mediator, what we do is we work with the parties to explore the behaviours, but to actually understand what their needs and goals were at the point of the conflict, to be able to learn from the conflict, to have a communication with each other, and actually identify a solution which is based on their needs and their interests, rather than a negotiation of behaviours that are or not appropriate. So it's a very different way of addressing our problems and securing positive and constructive outcomes which address our emotional, psychological needs within the organisation, as well as addressing the behaviours that might be problematic. In doing so, the outcomes are far more sustainable and often far more robust. So those conflicts are having an impact within organisations. According to the Confederation of British Industry and the Centre for Dispute Resolution, recent research suggested that £33 billion a year is lost to the UK economy due to unresolved workplace disputes. Point 3 I really like here. A third of managers would prefer to parachute jump for the first time than address a problem at work. Yet point 7 says that TCM mediators and also in-company mediators achieve a successful outcome in over 90% of mediation cases. Point 4, according to ACAS research, which was fascinating when I found this on the ACAS website recently, 99% of SME owners who were surveyed recently said that they saw mediation as a good tool for resolving workplace disputes. Now, small and medium-sized business owners, they are concerned about resources, and if they're saying that they think mediation might be useful, then I think that's a very powerful message that mediation does have a valuable part to play. So there we have in front of us a picture of Kofi Annan, the former General Secretary of the United Nations. And obviously the United Nations is very visible at the moment with the problems over in the Korean Peninsula. But when I see the picture of Kofi Annan and think about his role, the words that come to mind for me are diplomacy, courage, dialogue, bringing people together, promoting discussion, different interest groups coming together around the table. And I find that inspirational for me in terms of how I, as a mediator, help organizations develop systems and processes for resolving disputes and conflicts. I think about empathy, I think about respect, I think about dignity. Yeah, when I talk to organizations about where's your, who's the Kofi Annan in your business, where are the safe spaces for dialogue to happen in your organizations, who are your business diplomats? Where's this conversation happening? Organizations look at me blankly and say, David, it's not happening. We've got a policy framework called, or part of our policy called informal resolution. Is that what you mean? It's like, no, that's not what I mean. What I mean is how is it built into your organization where people can go and have constructive conversations. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should aspire to be or act like Kofi Annan. But what I am suggesting as a mediator is that where we apply a mediatorly approach as managers, as leaders, as HR professionals, we can help people resolve disputes or prevent disputes at a much earlier stage. And in doing so, by acting as a diplomat, by promoting dignity and respect and empathy in our relationships, perhaps we can all have a little bit of the United Nations within our organizations. And as we'll see, that will add real value to your business and how you handle conflicts and disputes. So they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. Here are some of the words in terms of what mediation is. First and foremost, to offset it against those adversarial systems I've already talked about, it's a non-adversarial way of resolving difficult situations, conflict, change, crisis. It's about coming together. It's not about blaming and judging and applying sanctions. It's about listening. It's about talking. It's about hearing each other. It's being used as a powerful alternative to formal or legal processes. And we've developed here at TCM a very unique definition of mediation. We call it the tripartite definition. We see mediation as a framework, the third party intervening into a dispute. We see it as a set of competences, and we see it as a process that organizations go through in terms of change. It's a mindset shift in terms of how organizations change the way that they think about the conflicts and disputes. So the mediator is an impartial third party. It's someone who's not directly interested in the relationship, but it can be a manager, it can be a leader. And as I've said, there's good examples of mediation working within organizations. The mediator helps the parties to have an open and honest dialogue, and doing so helping them to identify mutually acceptable outcomes, a win-win outcome. Both parties gain something. It's mutually advantageous to both parties. And mediation is different, and it's different because it's about collaborating rather than blaming. And again, if you think about your HR suite or your management suites within your organizations, certainly when we think about formal policy and process, most formal policies and processes that exist around dispute resolution are about blame rather than promoting collaboration. Yet we know from game theory and leadership best practice that collaboration is at the heart of the successful firm. So agreements in mediation come from the parties themselves, not the mediator. And I have a really strong basis that I work to, is that the parties know how to resolve the dispute. They don't need me or anyone else to tell them how to talk to each other, how to say good morning to each other, how to communicate respectfully when they're in a one-to-one meeting, how to give and receive feedback without becoming defensive. They don't need me to tell them how to do that. My job is to create the conditions where they can figure it out for themselves. So I'm not there to judge or blame or to say one's right or the other's wrong. I'll never get it right if I tried, and my experience of judgmental processes or determination processes in organisations is it tries to put a black and white approach to things that are often grey. It's not easy to determine who is really genuinely right or wrong, or who's harmed more than the other. We're not there to tell the parties what they should do. And of course, mediation itself is a voluntary process, and it's a confidential process. It's a place where people can be open and honest and engage in meaningful dialogue with each other without that information being used outside of the mediation process. And for those of you who are interested in what that might physically look like, one of the things that we do in mediation is at the end of the process, all of the notes from mediation that we take as mediators and that the parties take at the end of the process are torn up and destroyed at the end of the mediation. There is no record of the mediation process other than the agreement that the parties may enter into. And even the status of the agreement that the parties enter into is also confidential between themselves. It allows the parties to have a long overdue, open and honest conversation between themselves. I mentioned the tripartite definition of mediation just to summarise that. So thinking about mediation now as a framework, as a competence and as a mindset. So the mediation becomes embedded into the fabric of the organisation. And when I'm working with organisations, my first question is how does the use of mediation relate to the values of your organisation? How does it support the role that leaders and managers are playing? How does it underpin your employee engagement and health and well-being programs? Is mediation being featured in your training programs for your managers? Are we looking at developing core competencies for managers to prevent and resolve disputes? And how can mediation support that? So a little scenario here that I thought I'd share with you. It's a made-up scenario, but it's based on a composite of various activities that I've dealt with in the years gone by. So James is a fairly new manager, appointed 12 months ago, managing a team of 6. He's never managed a team before, and he didn't really feel ready for the promotion. But you know, in at the deep end, so to speak, he was looking forward to the opportunity. Zoe, unbeknownst to James, also applied for the job and didn't get it, and James did. But almost immediately upon James taking on his management position, Zoe began to resist his management. He doesn't really know why, and he's not sure of all of the issues, and he's really starting to find it difficult. Zoe has recently refused to attend one-to-one meetings with him, so she won't sit down with him one-to-one. So the opportunities for dialogue and communication have broken completely, which is proving to be challenging for both of them. When they do find themselves in a space with each other, she can be sarcastic and rude or just very quiet. So again, the communication is hostile. It's characterised by challenge and discord in their relationship. Zoe is struggling to perform in her role, and James doesn't know what to do to be able to address that poor performance, and she's increasingly late for work. And again, James does not know what to do to address her tardiness. He's not sure what he can say, he's not sure how to respond, he's not sure how to react to it. So he's becoming quite stressed and anxious, and we often forget that managers who are experiencing these difficulties do express stress and anxiety. You know, they're not easy issues to deal with for any manager, particularly a new manager such as James in this particular instance. And Zoe is just becoming less and less engaged. Just you know, she just doesn't really give of her best in her role. So the situation's deteriorating quite rapidly, and neither party's really sure how to stem this deterioration. And you might recognise that in your own organisations, or being typical of some of the issues that you might experience in your organisation. So what might happen? There we have James and Zoe. Bang, flares up. James is shouting at Zoe. Zoe's got her arms in the air. She's shouting at James. You can see the direction of travel this is heading in. Both parties are going to go up to, back to their various corners. Ring HR. HR, help. Can please come in and investigate an allegation of bullying or harassment or underperformance reported by one party or the other. And of course, we've seen this so many times. Those two parties where they could have perhaps resolved those issues through dialogue and through conversation, so the relationship is torn asunder and irreconcilably impacted upon because of their inability and lack of confidence and competence to have a conversation, and ultimately because we both know they're about to go into a process framework which is going to make the situation even harder to resolve. How might a mediator have responded had James and Zoe come to the mediator? Well, these are some hints and tips. The mediator or the HR professional, so it doesn't have to be a mediator. It could be someone within the organisation who's trained in mediation skills, could help the parties have a conversation with each other, de-escalate and diffuse the hostility and the anger. So listening actively is the first and most important starting point. Giving the parties a really good listening to, not to find evidence and facts or mitigation and corroboration, but to help the parties to describe their emotions, their concerns, their interests and their needs. Of course, if James was doing this with Zoe or an HR professional, you can also be clear about your own needs and goals. There's a dialogue that is happening already because we're listening to each other, we're not blaming each other. And what often happens in conflict is we lose the ability to listen. We become defensive and guarded. And the best form of defense in most conflict situations is attack. And if we're attacking the other party, it's very difficult. Or if we're attacking the other party or feeling guarded and defensive, it's very difficult to listen actively. And the mediator can encourage that within the dispute. The mediator will create a safe space for the parties to come together. So again, a question for yourselves, and maybe look at your internal dispute resolution systems. Where's the safe space in your business? Who owns that safe space? Who manages the safe space? Do you actually have the word safe space written into your grievance procedure? If not, your grievance procedure is not fit for purpose, because the human need for safety, and if that need isn't being met, the sense of fear and anxiety is a major barrier to us communicating with each other. So the mediator will establish some guidelines and ground rules, very simple, respecting each other. When you're in the room together having a conversation, listen to each other. Be courteous to each other. Be open-minded when you're in a room with each other. Don't finish each other's sentences. So some simple guidelines that will help the parties to have a safe, open and honest conversation. And of course those ground rules can be useful for managers and HR professionals, not just in bringing Zoe and James together, but when we're having our appraisals in team meetings. I do a lot of work with senior managers and line managers on handling and diffusing tension within team meetings. And I advocate a system called circle time. I've got a 4-year-old boy, Daniel. They use this in his nursery. It's a very powerful tool. The group sit in a circle, whether it's at a school, in an office, in a distribution centre, in a circle. One person talks. I'm sure you're familiar with the pipe of peace principle. One person talks and everybody else listens in a respectful, dignified way. That is one of the most powerful ways of spotting problems and addressing them and giving them some airtime and giving everyone an opportunity to resolve those, and introducing circle time methodology into the way that teams communicate with each other can make a significant difference to the way that the organisation handles conflicts and disputes. So it's about creating a safe space. This is difficult. It's challenging. Being impartial, not taking a view, not being kind of forced to take sides or to take a particular person's view over the others. But my experience of mediation is if I take a view that one person is right or wrong, 99.9% of the time I will be wrong myself, because I will only have so many facts and so much information at my disposal to make such a view. So what's the point of doing it, because it's going to be wrong. And the second one is if I'm bringing the two parties together, the other person is not going to want to sit in a room with me if they perceive that I'm entirely taking the other person's side. So they will disengage from the mediation process fairly quickly in the mediation activity. So from a practical point of view, as a mediator, where you need to remain impartial and neutral to allow all parties to feel safe and to be given the respect that they deserve as individuals in the process. And remaining empathetic is absolutely central to this. The ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, to hear their point of view, even for a moment, even for a microsecond before we engage our mouths, is consider the impact of what we're about to say on the person that's receiving the message. And we're not talking about deep empathy or emotional intelligence, of course this is what I'm talking about, but just for managers and others, just for a second, a fleeting moment, think about the impact of what you're about to say on the other person as though you are that other person. Again, it will change the way that we communicate. Depersonalizing the problem, so the mediator will encourage the parties to attack not the person, but to focus on the problem. And it's very quick for us in disputes to attack the other person as though the other person's a problem. There's many mediations I've done, which is often in high conflict situations, we've dehumanized the person to the other party to the extent that we've created a complete monster in our minds. And the mediator rehumanizes the parties and helps them to understand that they're both feeling hurt, fed up, frustrated, angry as a result of the conflict. They're having a human reaction. And thinking from the school of positive psychology, developed by a leading psychologist, Martin Seligman, and I'm a big advocate of the positive psychology framework as part of our mediation work, but here's a very simple analysis here, is build on the positives rather than focus on the negatives. It's really easy when we're in dispute resolution to focus on everything having gone wrong. Well, everything hasn't gone wrong. It might feel like it has, but there'll be an awful lot of good stuff that's going on. So accentuating the positives, building on the positives, yes, address the negatives, but don't lose sight that it's not all doom and gloom, even though it may feel like it when we're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking about our other, the vile protagonist on the other side of the desk. It's easy to become negative and drawn into that pattern of negativity. So those are 5 tips that we can all use, not just us as mediators, not just Kofi Annan, but all of us could be using in how we address conflicts and disputes in the workplace. So a question for yourselves is, how will you build those skills into your management and leadership practice within your organizations? So our framework at TCM, we call the FAIR framework. This is the framework that we take to organizations to help them transform the way they handle conflicts and disputes. It's a very powerful framework. Over 3,500 organizations here in the UK and overseas have now adapted the FAIR framework as part of their dispute resolution system. So the mediator or the HR professional or the manager helps to facilitate a dialogue. They build empathy and appreciation between the parties and between themselves and the parties, and in doing so they invite the parties to be innovative and creative in finding solutions. Now I'm running a webinar on the 11th of April in relation to mediation and its role in unlocking economic growth and competitive advantage for businesses. There are green shoots showing in our economy. Let's cross our fingers and hope that there's a period of economic growth ahead of us. And at the heart of that economic growth is innovation and creativity from UK businesses. Disputes hinder creativity and innovation. Dialogue, collaboration, mediation, so on and so forth, actually unlock the potential within our relationships to become innovative and creative. So for me, the I in the FAIR framework is one of the most powerful unlockers of economic growth and economic advantage, where we know that disputes hinder that. And the R in FAIR is about resolution. It's about reaching a resolution and an outcome that we're all mutually in agreement with. It's also about being resolute, and we find that the parties following a mediation process have a greater commitment to the agreement reached through mediation because it's their agreement. They own that agreement. It builds ownership and engagement in that dispute resolution process. So what actually happens in a mediation process? We'll move into the actual framework and the process now. And we're just in the final stages of signing off the video, which we produced, a high production video. We've had a production team producing it for us, and that'll be available on our website and our YouTube channel. And there are different versions of the video. There'll be a 3-minute short overview of a mediation process, and then there'll be a 30-minute detailed video in terms of looking at each of the stages of mediation. But I'm afraid for now, you've got me talking it through with you. But like I say, do keep an eye on our website and we'll send something out once that's gone live. So for the mediation to happen, we need disputing parties, I guess, and that might be 2 or more disputing parties. Someone from within the organisation will identify that there are disputing parties and make a request for mediation. The mediator will then contact the parties to prepare them for the mediation and to secure a mindset and a commitment to mediate. Parties are often quite resistant to mediation for various reasons, and again, another webinar that I run looks at overcoming resistance to mediation. But the mediator is well equipped at helping to secure a commitment and a buy-in to mediation from all of the parties in such a way as they will then contribute effectively to the process. The mediation then needs to happen within 10 working days of the contact with the parties, so that it avoids the inertia or undue delay. Mediation is going to happen over 1 full day. On the morning of the day, we meet the parties separately. The separate meetings allow the mediator to listen carefully to what the parties are saying, to hear their concerns, to allow them the time and the space to explore their experiences, their emotions, their opinions, their perceptions, the narrative of the conflict. The mediator also in the separate meeting will prepare the parties for meeting with each other. So we apply a coaching model in our work, and it's really about getting them ready and resilient for the challenges that will come when they do meet with each other, building their confidence and giving them the language that they need to be able to help them have a constructive conversation. So we use reframing skills amongst many others to help the parties frame their language. She'll never change, might say one of the parties, but what I'm hearing you say is you need her to understand that you need things to be done differently. How will you explain that to her, and how do you think she'll react when you tell her what needs to be done differently? So we help the parties frame their language and think about what they're going to say. Then we bring the parties together in the joint meeting, and this is an overview slide of what happens in that joint meeting. The joint meeting happens, it lasts for the entire afternoon. It might last for longer, but you'll be surprised to hear that even in the most belligerent, even in the most hostile, even the most difficult conflict, I might be returning someone to work after a 12-month period of absence due to bullying and harassment of a serious nature in the organisation. It doesn't often need to go much beyond that one-day model, but sometimes it does. But on the whole, this framework is very robust. The mediator starts the process. It's a very kind of controlled and managed process at the very beginning. The mediator is very much mediator-centric. We open the meeting, we put the parties at ease, we establish the ground rules that I've talked about, we help to create a safe space for the parties to feel that they can engage with each other. We ask the parties to turn and look at each other. I've done many mediations where the parties sit down in a room with each other and swizzle their chairs around and actually sit back to back. And we might slowly encourage the parties to turn around so they can actually look at each other. Very powerful work that the mediator is doing now, giving the parties a sense of being in the same space. Once we've got the mediation started, we ask both parties to speak, but we ask them to do it in such a way as one person speaks and one person listens. It's called uninterrupted talking time or talk time. The mediator manages that process and prevents the parties from interrupting each other, and we ask the parties to listen very, very carefully to what each other is saying. And in doing so, they start to get an insight and an understanding about the issues and concerns that the other parties bring in. Once both parties have had an opportunity to speak and to listen to each other, the mediator summarizes back what they've heard, and it's a very sophisticated summary. When we're training mediators in core mediation skills or to accredited standard, we spend a lot of time focusing on how to summarize, focusing on areas of divergence, convergence, complementary issues and needs that we're hearing. And then the mediator stops speaking and we sit back a bit, and this is an opportunity for the parties to have an exchange. And that exchange, as you can imagine, if you've done dispute resolution work, you'll know that it could start off very quiet and there's lots of nervousness, or it could start off really loud and the parties are sort of almost shouting at each other. The mediator's role in the exchange is to manage that process, to keep it safe, but we're not there to smother the conflict or to avoid dealing with the difficult issues or the elephants in the room. So the mediator helps the parties pick their way through the issues, but in a controlled and managed way, and that's what the mediator brings. The mediator always remembers this key maxim. The parties own the content. a mediator owns the process. And by having that thinking in our mind, we can ensure that the parties own the issues that they're raising and discussing with each other. Our job is to help keep the process on track and to keep it feeling that there's some momentum. And of course, what happens is the parties start to say things like, well, if I'd have known then what you're telling me now, that you had this issue at home, or that you were feeling stressed out, or that you were feeling so scared of me. I didn't realize you were feeling so scared of me. I'm horrified to hear that you were feeling so nervous around me. Now I know that, then what I'll do differently tomorrow is ... And the mediator begins to capture that and turn it into an action plan or agreement. Sometimes it's an in-principle agreement. In principle, we'll communicate more effectively, or we're more respectful, we'll learn to trust each other. But slowly we then turn that into a smarter set of outcomes. We'll say good morning to each other. We'll produce the reports on time. We'll turn up to team meetings. We'll start our supervision sessions. We'll have that appraisal that we've been putting off for the last 2 years. And then slowly the mediator then begins to close the session down. But we close the session by, in essence, deconstructing everything that the parties have agreed. So the mediator might say to the parties, great, you've both said that you're going to have one-to-one meetings once a month. What happens if the CEO calls you up and you can't do a particular meeting? Does that mean all bets are off and the mediation agreement has crumpled and failed? So we start to contingency test the agreement, make sure it's fit for purpose and can be tested and in the reality of working life. And finally, we'll help the parties develop what we call our dispute resolution clause. In the event of a future dispute, which is always likely to happen, just because they've been through mediation doesn't mean they're going to skip off through the meadow hand in hand, smiling. They might do that, but the chances are a little bit more of reality is likely to be the case, and they're going to experience tough, challenging times ahead. And the question the mediator is going to ask those parties is, are you resilient enough now, based on your discussions, to handle the tough times, not if they happen, but when they happen. The blue box on the left, we use infrequently. That's just taking breaks and helping to bring the parties, separate the parties and maybe act as a shuttle mediator. We tend to use that more when we're mediating compromise agreements, settlements, or financial arrangements where we're trying to help close the gap. In our workplace and employment mediation work, it tends to be used less. So that's the mediation process in a nutshell. Like I said, the video is going to be produced shortly. I run monthly workshops free of charge. We do a lot of stuff free of charge, webinars and workshops around the country. So I run workshops here in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Glasgow. And obviously I can go into more detail if you wanted to come along to one of those about what actually happens in the mediation process. We do have a YouTube channel. There's loads of snippets and vox pops and videos and stuff on our YouTube channel. Like I said, this big new video that we're launching will be on there soon. So why bother? What are the benefits of this approach? Well, I was working in one local authority and I met the head of HR. I was just talking informally. He said, David, you know that the work you've been doing for us, one of our mediators recently mediated successfully in a case that was definitely heading to an employment tribunal. That would have cost us at least £20,000 to £30,000 that each. They kind of prepared. They knew it was going to be difficult. And as a result of the mediation working and preventing the case going to an employment tribunal, that's paid for the development of our entire mediation program across the whole of our organisation. So the return on investment for that local authority for embedding mediation across the entire local authority was one successful mediated case. When I say it, it makes me think, why on earth are we not doing more of this? And of course we are. Of course organisations are. The return on investment can be substantial. I call it the return on mediation. So you start to see the amount of time being spent on disputes being reduced. It might take time, it can be gradual, but the amount of time is being reduced. The legal costs, absentee costs are reduced, recruitment and office cover. One large organisation that we were working with, we did some forensic level analysis of the cost of conflict of that organisation. The cost of conflict of that organisation was somewhere around £20,000 to £30,000 mean cost per dispute in that organisation. Once they took absence into account, it tripled the cost of conflict of that organisation up to nearly £100,000 per case if absence was taken into account. And it hadn't occurred to me that absence and attrition was such a significant cost to the business until I saw those figures for myself. You should also start to see managerial confidence going up. sense of well-being, engagement. You know, I'm an engagement guru on the Engage for Success task force with David McLeod and Nita Clark. You know, their reports show that less than 1 in 3 employees are engaged in our workplaces, and suggest that employee engagement again is critical to becoming a high-performing economy again. Well, I would argue, how can you engage when you can't talk to each other because you've fallen out or having a quarrel with each other? So at the heart of effective employee engagement, and David McLeod supports this and says himself, that mediation is integral to effective employee engagement within our organisations. And also it can improve the customer experience. Whether you're an NHS trust or a retailer, again, the customers are impacted when employees are quarrelling or involved in some sort of a dispute. And it impacts the customer experience. And mediation can help address that particular point. So who mediates in organisations? I'm coming to the end of the session now. It's managers can mediate. I was arguing managers are the best mediators that your organisation has by a long shot. So upskilling managers and giving them the tools that they need to spot problems and resolve them quickly is the best way of implementing a mediation program. Internal mediators can assist where you need someone who's not part of the team function but not having to outsource an external mediator. And big aim external mediators, the kind that I provide here through TCM, are available for organisations who want to outsource it because they know that someone from outside the business does this every day of the week. Quality is assured, their independence is secured, and you know you're getting a quality service. So what might the next steps be after the webinar? Well, obviously these webinars are an opportunity for me to profile our business, and like I said, this is one of our most popular webinars, which tells me that there's obviously a lot of organisations who are interested in finding out about mediation. I also recognise that it takes time. It's not something that organisations just buy today, and it does take time. So we recognise that building a long-term relationship is key. So to help build that long-term relationship, what we're able to do is undertake an on-site meeting or presentation. We can provide training. We have a training centre here in London, and we provide training across the UK. And we have short courses, 1- and 2-day courses, focusing on everything: employee engagement, core mediation skills for managers, HR, mediation skills for HR professionals, coaching skills, investigation skills. There's a whole raft of courses that we offer. And if we prefer to be working in companies, so if you're interested in sourcing training in company, we also run try before you buy courses. So if you want to come along to one of our courses, and as the name suggests, try before you buy, we're able to accommodate you there. We provide mediation services for organisations. So if you need someone, you know, if you're thinking, well, okay, this is being interested, then and you're thinking that it would be good to use an independent mediation service, we provide those. And we also offer for attendees on all of our webinars, companies that we've not worked with before, our no win-win, no fee offer. And basically that means if you've got a case, then pass us your most difficult case. You know, if you want to refer that for mediation, and we'll mediate it as we would in any other case. But if we don't reach a successful outcome for you, we won't charge you for that case. We're that confident in our ability to mediate. All we would ask for is the ability to triage the case properly, and also if it doesn't work, or if it does work, the opportunity to debrief that with you. But as I said, you're guaranteed that if it's not a successful outcome, you don't pay for that dispute. So something that's worth bearing in mind. We also help to undertake cost of conflict analysis, help to build a business case for mediation. We've built mediation schemes in Transport for London, DWP, DHL, many, many others. And all of those organisations have used us to help to build their internal business case. And as I've mentioned, if it moves, we run a webinar on it at the moment. So keep an eye on our website for our webinar programs, from introductory webinars through to more advanced technical webinars on different aspects of negotiation and mediation. And as I've mentioned, the one on the 11th of April is the economic growth webinar. So in conclusion, I think I have to express an interest here. As a mediator, I probably would say this, but I hope that I've begun to persuade you that mediation is the most effective form of dispute resolution available. There are a range of options. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. No company ever wants to buy a mediation service out of the box. It's always going to be designed around your business. Developing a strategic approach to mediation is more effective where it's embedded into the culture and values of the organisation than just having it as a kind of call-off or as and when basis. and it delivers real benefits, real return on investment. It works. It's a very powerful process. So thank you very much for listening. I guess less participation on the webinar. Always slightly different than webinars. Actually, I've got a couple of questions here now. So let me just see if I can read that question. It's not that easy to read. So excuse me. So how do you think mediation? So this is from Sophie. How do you think mediation will sit in the workplace with the new rules and early settlement being pushed by the government and ACAS? I think it sits really well. I mean, the government are making it explicitly clear that the employment tribunal system, a state-funded justice process, is not the place to be bringing our workplace quarrels and disagreements. And I wholeheartedly agree with the government on that basis. I think encouraging early resolution, promoting mediation. I work closely with ACAS, and ACAS are endorsing our model resolution policy, which we're launching on the 17th of May. And the government are actively promoting mediation within organisations, recognising that employment tribunals are the least best place for us to resolve our disagreements and disputes. I think there's still a bit of tinkering around the edges. I think the message still needs to come out to organisations that there's no statutory duty to have a grievance procedure, that encouraging resolution procedures and encouraging mediation is the right way forward. And I meet regularly with officials from BIS and the Ministry of Justice promoting the use of mediation, but I know the government get it and they're actively supporting it. So I don't think we've had a more mediation-friendly administration than we do now, but I'm sure other parties are also supporting it. So I think it's exciting, and there's a lot going on in that space. So thanks for that question, Sophie. If you have any other questions, then please do feel free to email me after the webinar, but I'll end it there and say thank you very much for listening. I'll just hand over to Michelle, who's going to finish off.
Thank you, David. And thank you once again for joining us today. Our next webinar will be Mediation and Economic Growth, and that's going to be on the 11th of April. Do hope you can join us, and happy mediating. Thank you. Bye-bye.